welcome. This is going to be a nice little intimate chat about the, I guess, Black Lives Matter, but I'm starting not quite today. I'm starting a little further because we can't understand it without the history. Marcy, are you from the United States?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, so you know the introduction because I wasn't sure who would be here. So, and then we will have a section on a little bit of history, a section on reparations, and then some videos to try and explain what is now a very messy environment and how Black Lives Matter is repeatedly responding to this. First historically, and then in the middle of the 20th century, and now. Alan, you're on if you want to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan Bowman here. First, I'd like to mention something that happened today that I think has some significance. Congress in the United States passed an anti-Asian hate crimes bill today, which is, I think, significant. It expands the concern for human rights and civil rights of all people without regard to background, nationality, and race. And it makes you wonder why it took hundreds of years to consider that it was necessary to pass an anti-Asian hate crimes bill in light of what Asians endured when they were building railroads out west and that sort of thing, and just generally in America and the world in terms of discrimination. But I think that's a very significant event, and for everybody, not just Asians, I think for the world. With respect to Black Lives Matter, in the plaque that says movements toward democracy, I think that it is significant, at least from my perspective as a Black man. When I hear Black Lives Matter, I don't see that as a Black supremacy group or a group of people who are advocating that Black people should receive better treatment than anybody else or hold higher, higher regard in the civil rights movement otherwise. I think that it's a movement that attempts to humanize Black people and encourage equal treatment of Black people in this life. I think that we are relatively uniquely suited in terms of the ways in which we've been discriminated against and the long road that we've traveled to where we are now without much what I would call relief from discrimination. So I think Black Lives Matter, from my perspective, I'm not a member of that group. What I understand them to be doing is to try to ease discrimination against Black people that is unique, like the cop killings and that sort of thing. No other ethnic group in America suffers from that the way we do. And I think that Black Lives Matter serves a good purpose in trying to, improve that aspect of our lives in the world. Now, this is the second reference. The United States Constitution of 1787 in the 3/5 compromise. It always amazes me how crafty of men be in terms of trying to find devious ways to discriminate against people or to get an advantage based on exploitation of another race. 3/5 compromise would have counted at the United States Constitution. The South and the North were negotiating. The 3/5 compromise would have made each slave count as 3/5 of a man as opposed to a whole man. And the reason for that, and then the Northerners insisted upon that so that the Southerners would not get an advantage in congressional districts and that sort of thing, because if you counted Black people as a whole man, they would get a numerical benefit that would have altered the political spectrum in America. But I don't think that I could have thought of something like that myself. So I think that's significant. Abraham Lincoln, elected as president, I think that most people feel that his agenda was one of free Black people and racial. But I myself and a lot of Black people feel the way I feel, that it was economic, that the North did not want the South to get an unfair advantage based on the economics of being able to have slave labor as opposed to having to pay people. It's sort of like what's going on today. You get an advantage with free labor. And that's what I think this was about. They beat back the South because the South had an advantage that couldn't be overcome because of that. Now, also, Lincoln propounded a form of reparations with his 40 acres and a mule. It was rescinded ultimately by Andrew Johnson, never came into fruition. But I think that it's an interesting concept, and it's an interesting concept that it was rescinded, and that now, a couple hundred years later, there's a movement on to try to resurrect that. But I think that the problem will be the calculation, identifying the person's owed and what and how much they're owed. But I think the reparations is absolutely a meritorious concept. If you hold people in bondage for 300 years and work them for free, you build your businesses, your institutions, your homes, your families, educate yourselves, and all that sort of stuff with that free labor, the fruits of it, and then you free the slaves, you just send people to fend for themselves. When you've got an advantage economically that could never be overcome without some affirmative action, some affirmative understanding, and some affirmative effort to clear it up, and some acceptance to a greater extent, numerically and percentage-wise, amongst the Caucasian race, that it's owed, that it's a debt owed, and it's a legitimate debt. The 13th Amendment, there's so many interesting twists and turns in the racial journey in America. The 13th Amendment, quote unquote, freed the slaves. We know that's not true. It freed them from what you might call legal bondage, but then you go into the next phase, de facto and other means that it was accomplished. And shortly thereafter, even though they passed an amendment that freed the slaves, they passed the 14th Amendment to give civil rights for everybody in America. And it's a strange phenomenon that you actually would need the 14th Amendment after the 13th Amendment. It would seem that anti-slavery thing was across the board, kind of everybody's equal, and you have to treat them that way. Now, something that's always been interesting to me as a black man is that white men gave black men the right to vote before they gave it to white women, which tells you something about the insidious nature of their thinking and their control mechanisms. And your mother can't vote, your sister can't vote, but black males can vote. I don't know how they pulled that off, so to speak, but they did for a long time before that was cleaned up. Jim Crow laws. Now, should I talk about the deviousness that with which people go about this effort to discriminate against people? The Jim Crow laws are amongst the most interesting in that regard to me. Jim Crow laws made it a crime for a white person to allow a black person to frequent their business establishment. If you let a black person come in and sit at the counter and drink a milkshake or go to your grocery store, they come and arrest you or give you and put you in jail and give you a fine as a white person. It's like who could think of something like that? I mean, to me, it's just amazing. But that's what Jim Crow was like, an effort to hold back white people who wanted to be fair, who wanted to be egalitarian. That was an effort to stop that. The civil rights movement and the backlash, and Stokely Carmichael particularly mentioned in this particular placard. I was a young male, black male, living in Cincinnati, Ohio, during the civil rights riots in the 1960s. And in Cincinnati, and I think throughout America, H. Rap Brown and some other fellows were actually more significant than Stokely Carmichael, because those were the guys who were showing up in the black community, giving speeches. I mean, across the board, they weren't on the high road, so to speak, and identified as people involved in the movement. H. Rap Brown, Huey Newton, those fellows, they were on the scene. They were actually on it. And I'm not saying that I have some, let's say, unfettered good reaction to the movement, but it served a purpose. And I think it's a debate that needs to be had, whether or not the debate between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King relative to what's the appropriate modality to try to secure rights, peaceful demonstrations, or a more strident approach. I think that'll always be an issue
That's right.
So we resolve the civil rights issues. Police reform. You know, it's like a difficult concept to analyze fully. If you're a black, I'm 69 years old, been a black man in America for 70 years, and I've seen many different perversions of police behavior. But the common denominator, year in, year out, unequal enforcement of the law relative to people of color. And not just in terms of the laws deal not to do this, but the violence that is so prevalent directed at black males from police because of their participation in relatively minor traffic, relatively minor activities, but nonetheless, they're targeted. And I think that it's because amongst an unacceptably high percentage of people in the police community who have violently virulent anti-black sentiment are able to act on in their particular positions. And I think that, you know, police have to be reformed, but the people who become police have to start. When people are little kids, the same way when you ever come from a black family, start you have to start with a Muslim that's calling his own. You have to start raising your own kids with the right values when they're little kids. You can't wait till they're 16 years old or expect them to get that in school. You have to make a concerted effort to make your kids and your grandkids good people who care about other people, who fight for justice and freedom like Maria and people like her, and who do it quietly sometimes, but effectively. And she got me to stay in the office until 9 o'clock at night to talk about these things. Because you're inspiration.
Because I live here, right?
Huh? And George Floyd, unfortunately, is a symbol of an enduring problem. And in my lifetime, I've seen many events that cause a temporary, what you might call, epiphany relative to what's good and what's wholesome and what's right and what's wrong. But those things tend to be transient and ephemeral. They don't maintain themselves as movements. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not optimistic that George Floyd's untimely death and sacrifice will lead to the benefits that people hope it will. But inshallah. Thank you very much, Maria and Marcy.
No, thank you, Mr. Bowman. And because it's helpful to hear this background, and I will figure out how to do this. I'm going back to the second slide and listen to the inaugural speech that was delivered by Amanda Gorman, because I think she beautifully and intuitively and very communicatively represents the long struggle. And I'll try and share, the text exists in many languages. I'll try and share it via email as we watch. If you cannot hear me, that's my error and I will fix it. Can you hear it?
Yes. Can't hear it anymore. Started out.
Maria, we are not hearing anything.
Here?
We're just hearing static.
Oh. I apologize. I thought it. No, that's my. Okay.
It's not working, whatever you're trying to do.
No. It is, well, it was, but now okay, 1 second. Okay. Okay, now let's begin this again.
Mr. President, Dr.
Can you hear
Biden,
it this time?
Madam
Yes.
Vice President,
Thank you. I
Mr.
apologize.
Emhoff, Americans, and the world. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the windswept northeast where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
Okay, can you hear me in between?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right, because then I will go on to the next slide, next video, which is actually the civil rights movement, unless you want to go first, Marilyn, with reparations.
I can do the reparations. Just walk me through how to pull up my PowerPoint.
Okay. I exit share at the bottom of your screen.
Where it
Go
says
to-
share screen.
And your PowerPoint is open, I assume.
Yes.
Okay, just click on your PowerPoint.
Okay. Let me. Okay. Good evening, everyone. We'll try to get through this. I was trying to get everything in that I could and without keeping us here till midnight. In our Declaration of Independence, and we've heard it before, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in Deuteronomy, it says, and if thy brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, be sold unto thee and serve thee 6 years, then in the 7th year thou shalt let him go from thee, free from thee. And when thou sendest him out free from thee, thou shalt not let him go away empty. Thou shalt furnish him liberally out of thy flock and out of thy floor and out of thy winepress. Of that wherewith the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, thou shalt give unto him. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a bondman in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God redeemed thee. Therefore I command thee this thing today. First of all, I want to deal with the issue of apologies. I can't see our pictures are covering up the, let's see,
Okay.
let me
Go to
change
the
the
top
view.
of your, go to the top of your screen on the right-hand side. You see a little view that looks like an X game box.
Yes,
Click on that, and then that should change the directions of your view.
okay. More chat view. Hide video panel. There we go. The United States has rightly apologized to other wrong groups of fellow Americans, the World War II Japanese internees, Hawaiians, Native Americans, and the Tuskegee syphilis study victims. In all these cases, Washington engaged in dehumanizing behavior toward a group of people in the name of the United States. In 2008, the House, and then in 2009, the Senate put forward resolutions apologizing for slavery, but no joint bill was passed. So in every time different measures or opportunities for apologies come up, there's always something that hinders the final decision. Since 1989, prominent African-American representatives have proposed larger bills to address America's original sin. While these proposals focus on reparation, it is noteworthy that they start with calls for a formal national apology. And we raise our children up from little ones to be able to say, I'm sorry. But for the United States, it's been very difficult to get a formal national apologies for African Americans. This just shows different states that have apologized for their historical roles in supporting slavery. And this is the second part of that slide. In dealing, after the apology, we are looking at reparations. Reparations are defined as the making of amends for a wrong one has done by paying money to or otherwise helping those who have been wronged. The courts required a convicted offender to make financial reparation to his victim. And reparations can come in all different type of ways other than just financial. Many give these excuses for not dealing with reparations. Reparation-induced resentment towards Blacks by non-Blacks would increase. Blacks would claim that the solution is even more reparations, and the vicious cycle would continue. It was so long ago, there is no reason to keep bringing up slavery. Wouldn't Black reparations only create more animosity between the races? Demands for reparations should be directed at the African countries, since some Africans sold other Africans into slavery. Groups who bear no responsibility for slavery will be compelled to foot the bill, particularly groups who immigrated to the United States long after slavery was over. And I'm just scooting through each of my slides. We can always come, if we have time, we can always come back and address any of these. Ta-Nehisi Coates, an author, Black author, says that one cannot escape the question by hand waving at the past, disavowing the acts of one's ancestors, nor by citing a recent date of ancestral immigration. The last slaveholder has been dead for a very long time. The last soldier to endure Valley Forge has been dead much longer. To proudly claim the veteran and disown the slaveholder is patriotism a la carte. A nation outlives its generations. We were not there when Washington crossed the Delaware, but Emmanuel Gottlieb Lutzy's rendering has meaning to us. We were not there when Woodrow Wilson took us into World War I, but we are still paying out the pensions. If Thomas Jefferson's genius matters, then so does his taking of Sally Hemings' body. If George Washington crossing the Delaware matters, so must his ruthless pursuit of the renegade Oney Judge. There have been times in our nation's history when reparations have been given, They were given to Native Americans. They were given to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II. The United States, via the Marshall Plan, helped to ensure that Jews received reparations for the Holocaust, totaling 3.45 billion Dutch marks in various investments. For African Americans, never. When the word reparation is heard, the first thought are dollar signs. The questions then that are asked is why, to whom, how much, where's the money coming from? As was previously stated about the 40 acres and a mule, land had been set aside under Lincoln to allocate 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land to Black families. Additionally, some families were to receive mules left over from the war, hence 40 acres and a mule. On April 15th, 1865, President Lincoln was shot and killed. Andrew Johnson, a Southern sympathizer, succeeded Lincoln in office. And then in the fall of 1865, Andrew Johnson reversed Field Order 15, and the lands that were supposed to be distributed among the slaves were distributed among former slave owners to compensate them for the loss of their slave property. After the Depression, the New Deal was implemented under President Franklin Roosevelt at a cost of approximately $50 billion. Two programs contained in this were Social Security and the GI Bill. In spite of having fought for this country and laboring to build this country, Black Americans did not have access to these programs. With Social Security and unemployment insurance, these excluded farm workers and domestics, jobs heavily occupied by Blacks. When President Roosevelt signed Social Security into law in 1935, 65% of African Americans nationally and between 70 and 80% in the South were ineligible.
Okay.
With the GI Bill, although African Americans have fought in every war that has been fought within the United States and other countries, they were not privy to all that the GI Bill had to offer. The often celebrated GI Bill failed Black Americans by mirroring the broader country's insistence on a racist housing policy. From the 1930s through the 1960s, Black people across the country were largely cut out of the legitimate home mortgage market. And this is just a view of redlining in Chicago. And the areas that are in pink are less desirable neighborhoods. And this is where Blacks were allowed to purchase homes. Instances of reparations within states and its institutions. Although we haven't received reparations nationally, there are some areas within our country, within the states that have opened their eyes and are working towards some type of reparations, although they haven't put forth an effort to reach out and try to figure out what is the best compensation for all, which is a large task. They're trying to do something. So we're acknowledging what they're trying to do. So in 2020, officials in Asheville, North Carolina, and I love Asheville, it's a nice little place, voted unanimously to provide reparations to their Black residents, according to reporting by the Asheville Citizens-Times. The reparations will not be paid out to individuals, but instead will mandate investments be made in areas where Black residents face the most egregious disparities. The Community Reparations Commission will help increasing minority home ownership, better access to affordable housing, and ownership of businesses and plans for closing the gaps in education and healthcare. And on these different commissions, I don't know how many Black people sit on the boards. So I don't know if they have input or if these decisions are being made on their behalf. In Evanston, Illinois this year, the housing program, they have a housing initiative in a historic plan to distribute 10 million in reparations to Black residents of Evanston, according to the resolution. The effort is to directly acknowledge and address the historical harm done to Evanston residents through discriminatory housing policies and practices and inaction by the city. The effort would prioritize descendants of Evanston residents who lived in the city between 1919 and 1969 or suffered housing discrimination after 1969. In 2019, Virginia Theological Seminary announced that they are creating a $1.7 million reparations fund, becoming one of the first American institutions to allocate money specifically for the descendants of the enslaved. The fund will also provide financial support for Black seminarians and Black worshipers who experience discrimination on campus. In 2018, the Catholic Sisters of the Society of the Sacred Heart created a reparations fund to finance scholarships for African Americans in Grand Coteau, Louisiana, where the nuns once owned about 150 Black people. In April, students at Georgetown University, a Jesuit institution, voted to create a fund financed by student fees to benefit the descendants of 272 people sold in 1838 to help keep the college afloat. They have committed 100 million to this fund. And Princeton Theological Seminary has pledged to spend 27 million on scholarships and other initiatives to address its historical ties to slavery and what appears to be one of the biggest efforts of its kind. Princeton.
Marilyn?
Yeah.
We probably need to begin to close because we've been asked to be out by about 10 of. So.
Okay. We're going to have these printed out, right?
Correct.
Okay, so in any additional information that's on here, we'll just print out the slides or have access to the slides, and you can go through and see the rest of it.
Yeah, and I don't think, as the slides move, I don't think we have time for the videos, but I try to select videos that reflect the breadth of the Black Lives Movement. There is one more video that talks about the civil rights movement of the 60s.
Right.
And then there is one that tries to deal with the concept of wokeness, because to be woke is simply learning and having learned and understanding yourself as maybe having learned something that comes from your early youth environment, etc. And then the misuse or the claiming of the symbols of the Black Lives Movement by the White Lives Movement in a very destructive way. And so the falseness of much of the media. And of course, that these are human rights violations, as also documented by other countries and human rights organizations. I'm sorry, but we do have to close. I apologize. I will mail this and more to Boyan, and then I will, I guess, thank you for your attention. And I'm sorry I cannot be there for the entire conference, because May 18th is a very important day. I was there 1 year. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.